and I will be the hearings official for this evening's hearing. There is one item on this evening's agenda, which is an appeal of a planning director's decision that approved a traffic impact analysis and adjustment review submitted by MAJ Development, city file numbers TIA 21-2 and ARA 21-4. Before we begin this evening's hearing, the staff who is moderating this hearing will provide some housekeeping information and explain the virtual hearing format and how we will be receiving oral testimony this evening. But before that, I would like to go through the hearings process and the procedures that we are required to follow. This hearing will be conducted in accordance with Chapters 2 and 9 of the Eugene Code and the requirements of ORS 197-763. After the staff's housekeeping comments, the hearing will begin with the staff's presentation of the staff report. The staff will outline the applicable approval criteria and explain its evaluation of those criteria as applied to the facts of this appeal. Following the staff presentation, I will invite the applicant to present its case. Following the applicant's presentation, I will invite the appellants to present their case, and then we'll invite public testimony. Due to the limitations of the virtual hearing platform, testimony will be received from the public in the order that interested parties have requested to speak. And again, staff will explain more fully how that testimony will be conducted. Following the public testimony, staff will be given the opportunity to respond to the testimony and to answer any additional questions I may have. And finally, as the party with the burden of proof, the applicant will be given the opportunity for rebuttal. In presenting your testimony, please direct your testimony, argument, and evidence to the approval criteria. If you disagree with the staff's evaluation of the criteria, or if you believe that other criteria apply that the staff has not identified, it is important that you state that in your testimony. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to allow me to recognize that the issue is being raised and to respond to that issue in my decision would preclude an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Therefore, in order to preserve your issue for appeal, you must raise the issues clearly during this hearing. I will also note that only issues related to the approval criteria are relevant to my evaluation, so please clearly establish that the issues that you are raising relate to the approval criteria. I simply cannot and will not consider evidence unrelated to the approval criteria in my evaluation and decision. I do not intend to place any specific time limits on any public or testimony by any of the parties, so long as the testimony and evidence presented through that testimony relates to the approval criteria. However, because I cannot legally consider testimony and evidence unrelated to the approval criteria, in the event that prolonged testimony strays from the criteria, I may need to set limits. That said, I am hopeful that that will not be necessary. Unless otherwise requested, the record of this appeal will close at the end of this evening's hearing. And in addition to the oral testimony provided this evening, any written testimony that is emailed to the staff during the hearing will also be included in the record. In addition, prior to the conclusion of this hearing, any participant may request to present additional evidence, arguments, or testimony regarding the application, either by requesting that the hearing be continued or that the written record be open for a period of at least 7 days. If you wish to make that request, you must do so before I close the hearing this evening. And I should note that even though the request must be made before the end of the hearing, because of the virtual hearing platform, if you do intend to request that the record remain open, I encourage you to do that during the course of your testimony, just so you don't have to make a second virtual request to speak. But again, the requirement is that the request must be made by the close of the hearing tonight. In preparation for this hearing, I have reviewed the agenda packet, which includes the February 27th staff report on the appeal, the planning director's decision, the appeal of that decision and the appeal statement, testimony submitted before February 22nd, including a February 11th email from George Keim and February 11th and February 12th emails from Paul Conte, a February 17th written testimony from Steve Morash, attorney for the applicant, February 18th written testimony from Susanna Stanley, a land use planner for the applicant, Administrative Order 48-02-02F, adopting the standards for traffic impact analysis, Administrative Rule R-9.6850. February 17th, referral comments from Doug Singer, the city's engineering development review manager. 3 separate letters of testimony, all dated February 18th, from Janet Jones, the applicant's transportation engineer. A February 16th public works referral response from Michelle Wilcox with the Public Works Engineering Department, and an email from Janet Jones to Mike McCarrow dated January 5th, 2022. I've also reviewed the underlying application files for the TIA and adjustment requests, including the application materials and all public testimony. Since the staff report was issued, I've also received the following written testimony. And the first section of this I received yesterday afternoon, an email exchange between Paul Conte and city staff, including a February 24th, 1:09 p.m. email from Paul Conte to Mike McCarrow, a February 24th, 3:07 p.m. email from Jeff Geppert to Paul Conte, a February 24th, 3:35 p.m. email from Paul Conte to Jeff Geppert, a February 24th, 4 p.m. email from Jeff Geppert to Paul Conte, a February 24th, 5 p.m. email from Jeff Geppert to Paul Conte, a February 24th, 5:30 p.m. email from Paul Conte to Jeff Geppert, a February 25th, 9:41 p.m. email from Paul Conte to Mike McCarrow, Jeff Geppert, and Gabe Flock, a February 27th, 8:19 p.m. email from Paul Conte to Mike McCarrow, Jeff Geppert, and Gabe Flock, a February 28th, 9:20 a.m. email from Mike McCarrow to Paul Conte, a February 28th, 9:34 a.m. email from Paul Conte to Mike McCarrow, a February 28th, 10:54 a.m. email from Jeff Geppert to Paul Conte, a February 28th, 12:17 email from Paul Conte to Jeff Geppert, a February 28th, 3:15 p.m. email from Mike McCarrow to Paul Conte, a February 28th, 3:37 p.m. email from Mike McCarrow to Paul Conte, and a February 28th, 4 p.m. email from Paul Conte to Mike McCarrow, and a February 28th, 4:09 email from Paul Conte to Mike McCarrow. Also an email exchange between Ted Koopman as the chair of the Jefferson West Side Neighbors and Mike McCarrow, including a February 27th, 5:33 p.m. email from Ted Koopman to Mike McCarrow, a February 28th, 12:11 p.m. response to that email from Mike McCarrow, a February 28th, 1:15 email from Ted Koopman to Mike McCarrow, a February 28th, 3:19 email from Mike McCarrow to Ted Koopman. Also an email from the city attorney, Lauren Summers, transmitting a request from Paul Conte that a February 28th, 5:24 p.m. email from Paul Conte to Lauren Summers be included in the record, and that includes that 5:24 email. Written testimony submitted March 1st by Ted Koopman and the email to Mike Carroll transmitting that written testimony. And again, I received those at the end of the day yesterday, and today at 1:19, today I received a March 1st, 1:19 email from Paul Conte to Mike McCarrow, and an email exchange between Paul Conte and Mike McCarrow, including a March 1st, 3:45 email from Paul Conte to Mike McCarrow, a March 1st, 5:47 email from Mike McCarrow to Paul Conte, and a March 1st, 6:12 p.m. email from Paul Conte to Mike McCarrow. And again, those last 4 emails I received this afternoon. Has the staff received additional written testimony that I have not included in this recitation?
Hearings official, we have received at least 4 emails of testimony within the last hour.
Okay, if during your staff report you can recite the individuals who submitted that testimony and then email that to me during the course of this hearing. I have not spoken to anyone outside this hearing regarding the merits of this application or the appeal, nor do I have any financial or other personal interest in the proposal or the appeal. I will not benefit in any way by the approval or denial of the application or the appeal. So at this point, I would like the staff moderator to review the process for requesting to testify and other housekeeping matters.
Thank you, hearings official. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeff Geppert. I'm going to be the moderator for tonight's public hearing. I'm joined by Linda Baker, who's also going to be providing assistance with some of the moderation. And so I'm going to quickly go over some of the procedures and some of the issues around virtual meetings before we get moving on with the rest of the hearing tonight. So Mike, if you would share your screen, that would be fantastic. I can reference that, but first and foremost, I just want to thank everybody that's joined us today so far. If anybody does have any technical issues, you can put those into the chat. I'm happy to work through technical issues such as non-operating mics or having trouble with the sound coming through. Otherwise, the chat function we are not able to disable. It's not part of the record. We're not answering or responding to anything in that chat. So any comments or testimonies should be provided as part of the verbal testimony versus in writing. So just want to make that abundantly clear. And so, Mike, I'm not sure, were you able to hit share screen on that yet?
I see an aqua around my screen, but you are not seeing it, it sounds like.
I am not. That's okay. You can.
Okay.
One thing I'll just say, so I'll move through this and you can kind of work through some of the technical details there. But since we all realize we're meeting virtually tonight, so I really appreciate everybody's patience as we continue to work through this virtual hearing platform. The thing I'm going to do to start with is to provide some instructions on, there it is on instructions on how to provide testimony when it's the testimony period. So you will do so by requesting to speak. To request to speak, you will raise your virtual hand. To raise your virtual hand, you will click the raise hand button that's in the menu. It's either at the bottom of the screen or at the top of the screen, depending on the setup, whether you're on a computer, smart device, or a tablet. If you're joining us by phone, you can dial *9 and you'll get audio confirmation that you have raised your hand when you do so. At the beginning of everybody's testimony, you will provide your name, your address, and whether you are in support, opposition, or neutral to the proposal at hand regarding this public hearing. I will be providing more detailed instructions regarding providing testimony before we jump into the actual public comment period tonight. One thing I know we've seen a couple of you ask questions about the fact that you don't have your mic or video options yet. You will get those when you are provided the opportunity to provide your testimony. Again, I'll provide more instructions around that when we get to that portion of the hearing this evening. And I do want to just note that we will ask everybody to raise their hands once we get to the public testimony portion of tonight's meeting. And as you see on the screen, we do have a general outline of tonight's hearing. We'll start with the hearings official opening it, which move through that. We're going to go to the staff presentation, applicant presentation, move into the public testimony phase. And again, right before that, I'll provide more instructions. Then we'll go into any staff response or questions from the hearings official. And so with that out there in the open, I will hand it back to you, hearings official.
Thank you. Okay, the staff for this appeal is Mike McCarrow, and at this point, I'll begin the hearing with the staff report.
Thank you, hearings official. I'm Mike McCarrow, associate planner with the city, and we are here this evening to hold a public hearing regarding the appeal of planning director's decision approving a traffic impact analysis and adjustment review for the MAJ Eugene Polk Street project. So what is traffic impact analysis? It's when a proposed use generates a certain amount of traffic. A review is required to see that the appropriate traffic-related facilities in the right-of-way are provided when required. And an adjustment review provides flexibility and is available where the land use code provides that a specific development standard may be adjusted. The subject property is located at the southwest corner of West 7th Avenue and Polk Street. It was the site of a bank which has recently been removed. The site is zoned Chamber Special Area Zone and it is in a commercial sub-area. The property to the west is in the same commercial zone. The adjacent properties across the street to the north and east have a C2 community commercial zoning similar to the subject site. To the south, across the alley, are dwellings in the R3 limited high-density residential zone. The property owner wishes to build a convenience store, 8 fueling stations, and a coffee business with a drive-through on the site. The city received the 2 applications, which have run concurrently throughout the process on the 1st of June last year. Additional testimony or additional materials were provided at several points since that time. The planning director approved the applications on January 28th of this year. The traffic impact analysis was approved without conditions, while the adjustment review was conditionally approved. This slide shows the mitigation required by the adjustment review decision as recommended by Public Works staff. Vertical signs, as well as stop bars and directional arrows on the pavement, will be required to facilitate internal circulation. The appellant grouped appeal arguments in 10 general areas. Number 1, the December 16th, 2021 public notice did not meet statutory requirements. The second argument, applicable development standards were ignored. The third point, no citing of specific evidence that all TIA requirements were met. The fourth argument, Public Works referral comments referenced but not in the record. The fifth point made by the appellant, only conclusory statements provided for the TIA general application requirements. Item number 6, the evaluation does not ensure that needed facilities to accommodate traffic impacts will be provided. Item number 7, missing elements of the TIA report were ignored. And from staff's perspective, arguments at point number 3, 5, and 7 are similar, focusing on the TIA requirements. Argument number 8, adjustment evaluation is flawed. The 9th point, the dismissal of traffic engineer Masad Sabarian's analysis is not based on substantial evidence. And the last point, issues in previous testimony not specifically raised in appeal statement are issues. The appellant's arguments were analyzed and considered by numerous staff as well as the applicant team. Staff report, including input from the applicant's representatives, has been provided to the hearings official that offers detailed evidence rebutting the appellant's arguments, item by item. Both the decision and staff report clearly show that the approval criteria for both applications have been met. Therefore, staff recommends the hearings official affirm the planning director's decision to approve both the traffic impact analysis and the adjustment review. As we discussed earlier, I have received testimony within the last hour, and per the hearings official request, I'll provide that to her during the meeting.
Mike, could you just quickly cite who the 4 pieces of testimony were from?
The 3 pieces of testimony were from Paul Conte, and the 4th piece I will have to get to you in a minute.
Okay, thank you. Does staff have any other comments before we turn over to the applicant?
I do not.
All right. At this point, I will invite the applicant's team to present their case. And if the moderator wants to invite the applicants to be panelists. Okay. And
It's just taking 1
Is
second. Sorry, it's being a little slow.
is it Janet Jones speaking on behalf of the applicant? Is that correct?
Correct. And we do have some others that will be joining here potentially that will be available to speak.
Okay, Ms. Jones, if you want to get started, and please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening, hearings official. My name is Janet Jones. Address is 1515 Southeast Water Avenue, Portland, Oregon, 97214. Thank you for the opportunity to present a summary of our adjustment and TIA applications for the Madge Polk Street development proposed at 710 Polk Street. My name is Janet Jones, and I am a licensed professional engineer specializing in traffic engineering in the state of Oregon. I would like to first introduce our project team for the record. The owner of the property is Mike Jenkins with Madge Development. Brent Ahrens is the project principal overseeing TIA and adjustment application. Brent is also a licensed professional engineer specializing in traffic engineering in the state of Oregon. Again, I am Janet Jones, the traffic engineer who prepared the TIA and the adjustment application for TIA 21-2 and ARA 21-14. Susanna Stanley is the team's land use planner who assisted with review of applicable code and city processes. Grant Hunter is a licensed architect in the state of Oregon. Grant laid out the site plan. And finally, we have Steve Morash, attorney at law. Steve available to answer any questions pertaining to city processes and applicable code criteria. The development proposal includes a 4,100 convenience market with 8 vehicle fueling positions and a 1,900 square foot coffee shop with drive-through window. The adjustment requests for the development include adjustments to vehicle stacking area, a direct alignment of 50 feet offset from accesses on the opposite side on the property. Minimum access station is 200 feet material and access outside the 250 foot influence area along a major arterial. The adjustment requests for this development include, it's important to note for this that existing conditions preclude meeting the access safety standards and providing a 33-foot driveway at the western property line, which would not accommodate fuel trucks accessing the site due to their turning geometry and would pose a safety risk by increasing vehicle conflict points and eliminating any sidewalk refuge area for pedestrians. The TIA provided an analysis of the traffic impacts associated with the proposed uses. Overall, the PM peak hour trips were lowered with more bank use. Queues at the West 7th Avenue access are projected to be between 25 feet and 75 feet during peak 15 minutes. For the remainder of the day, queues are expected to be shorter. In order to provide a plan to maintain safety and reduces the likelihood for on-site vehicles to block the access on West 7th Avenue, we provided recommendations for on-site mitigation that include stop bars and signage reading "Do not block driveway." Staff has required these mitigation strategies in addition with other traffic markings as shown here as a condition of approval. In summary, we provided a TIA that meets all of the city's TIA requirements and provided recommendations for improvements that would maintain safety for the public. Our adjustment requests meet the city standards while also taking our traffic analysis findings into consideration. Thank you.
Okay, are there other members of the applicant's team that wish to testify? And I don't know who it is, but could the staff person who is typing mute themselves so we're not hearing that in the background? I was having a little bit of trouble with that. So do any of the other applicant team members wish to testify?
At this time, I don't see any other hands from the actual applicant team.
Okay, then at this point, I will turn it over to the appellants. And based on the email that chain between Mike McCarrow and the representative of the applicant from the Neighborhood Association, I believe that Ted Koopman wishes to speak first. Is that correct? Okay, so Mr. Koopman, why don't you go ahead and please state your name and address for the record.
I am Ted Koopman, Chair of Jefferson Westside Neighbors, a city chartered neighborhood association in Eugene, Oregon, in which the project in question is located. I live at 971 West Broadway, Eugene, Oregon. As the elected representative of Jefferson Westside Neighbors, I urge the hearing official to support our appeal and deny the application. The problems with this proposal and frankly the entire process are numerous and serious. Further, the serious problems with entry, egress, and backed up vehicles on public streets are not in dispute. The fact that traffic at the intersection of West 7th and Polk is already problematic and will worsen is also not in dispute. The fact that the applicant failed to even conduct a quantitative on-site circulation analysis, a requirement for any granted exemptions to code, is not in dispute. These issues are acknowledged by both the applicant and staff. The solution, as proposed, is simply to ignore the code, ignore the requirements, and ignore the safety impacts so the desired project can move forward. The applicant is not entitled to the project they desire. They are entitled to the project that meets the requirements laid out in land use code and applicable administrative regulations. A proposed project that fit the site and met regulations will be fine with Jefferson Westside Neighbors. Our organization, representing the impacted residents, vehemently opposes the attempt by the applicant and the city staff to circumvent the regulations to accommodate what the developer wants rather than what the regulations require. Any one element, the convenience store, the gas station, or the drive-through coffee shop, could be removed to allow for safe and effective entrance and egress, as well as safe and efficient site circulation. Jefferson Westside Neighbors is not simply obstructing a project we dislike, and there are many reasons to dislike this project. All we ask is for this project to follow the rules designed to ensure public safety, rules that are supposed to apply to everyone, whether they are convenient or not. These requested adjustments are not minor. Allowing the project to proceed as proposed would put pedestrians, particularly disabled individuals, and the children on West 7th Avenue at risk by vehicles crossing and blocking the sidewalk directly adjacent to an MX station. MX is a crucial transportation service, particularly for low-income neighbors. The dangers here would be so obvious to any person experiencing it that would act as a deterrent to using the MX station. The potential for accidents and injuries is just simply too high to ignore. And herein lies the problem. The proposal and review of it by staff is based on unsupported generalities, whereas the harmful impacts have been directly demonstrated based on physical evidence. This is not a location to let traffic safety rules slide. Considering the overwhelming neighborhood opposition and the obvious conflicts with Vision Zero, we are dismayed that staff would waive so many requirements without conducting the diligent examination that is a responsibility to citizens. For these reasons, I urge the project to be denied. I am also requesting to keep the record open for 14 days to allow for additional evidence and testimony, and I thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much for your testimony. And I will note that you've requested the record be left open.
Thank you.
Okay, are there other members of the appellant team that wish to testify?
I just allowed in Sean Malone, who I believe I was referencing as he might be part of the appellant team. So
Yes,
Sean, you can correct
yes.
me if I'm wrong.
Sean, do you want to go ahead and get started? And Sean, if you want to turn on your video, that would be fine, or not, it's up to you.
Okay, I've had problems with my video
Okay.
recently. Kind of a dinosaur of a computer here.
Hey,
Hear me.
I get that.
Yeah. Okay, so Sean Malone on behalf of Paul Conte, 259 East 5th Avenue, Suite 200C, Eugene, Oregon, 97401. First of all, I'd like to request that the record stay open for 14 days. I've sort of enumerated in the testimony reasons for 7 additional days on top of the usual 7. The 2 issues I would like to focus on here are the adjustments number 1 and number 4.
1 and 4, is that what you just said?
That's correct, 1
Okay,
and 4.
thank you.
Try to hold the mic closer. With regard to adjustment number 1, EC, just to boil it down to its essence here, under the plain language of EC 9.8030 sub 28 sub A, an adjustment is warranted only if the physical conditions preclude compliance with EC 7.420. The applicant has not demonstrated that it is physically precluded from complying with the development standard. And that is because access is available along Polk Street. And so if the applicant is capable of satisfying the development standards in the code, then there is no reason for an adjustment. To provide an adjustment based on a sort of desire of the applicant would make the adjustment process superfluous and essentially a nullity. So this one's very basic. There's access that's available without requiring an adjustment, and therefore there should be no other adjustment allowed based on that access. As far as adjustment number 4 goes, there's essentially 4 requirements that allows for an adjustment. First, the site developer must demonstrate an alternative traffic safety study. 2, that a shorter driveway stacking area will provide safe ingress and egress to the development site. 3, it will not negatively impact efficiency of the public right-of-way. And 4, will not result in hazard to the bicycle, pedestrian, or vehicular traffic using the right-of-way. The McKenzie traffic impact analysis and adjustment falls short of satisfying these requirements. First, the applicant is not proposing an alternative traffic safety study. There's simply nothing alternative about the proposal. Instead, the applicant avoids the issue by alleging that the failure to comply with EC 9.6703 sub 3 sub A would not negatively impact the safety or efficiency of the public right-of-way, since this would only occur if traffic on West 7th Avenue is already backed up due to the background traffic conditions on West 7th Avenue. That is not an alternative. That is a deflection, alleging that the failure to satisfy the standard would only occur if there were standing queues on 7th Avenue. There's no dispute that there will be standing queues, at the very least during the busiest 15-minute periods. The applicant cannot simply assume free-flowing conditions on West 7th when the applicant already concedes the contrary at particular times of the day. So at the outset, the applicant has not presented an actual alternative. Second, the applicant alleges that the projected queues are not anticipated to adversely affect safety at the proposed site access. The applicant further notes that this access will be limited to right turns due to the one-way circulation of West 7th Avenue. Clearly, on a one-way street where the proposed use is on the right, the access will be limited to right turns. That's always going to be the case. There's really nothing added there. There is no alternative to that reality. There is nothing about making a right turn that inherently makes the access safe given the queuing issues. And there's nothing that ensures safety of pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorists. This problem is, again, that the applicant did not actually present an alternative. The applicant next pivots to its hope that despite the congestion, drivers will pass the right turn entrance and then take a right turn on Polk Street and access the development via Polk Street. Again, the problem is that that's an existing condition. The drivers, motorists, et cetera, could already do that. They're not presenting an alternative. And I suppose one of the ironies here is that while the applicant attempts to avoid access via Polk Street with regard to adjustment number 1, the applicant is now alleging, well, in order to resolve the other adjustment issues for 4, that they enter through Polk Street. Again, this could all be avoided. The first adjustment could be avoided by accessing via Polk Street, exactly what the applicant proposes under adjustment number 4 to resolve the issues. But the problem is there is nothing inherently that increases safety, increases efficiency, and decreases hazards that arises from motorists passing the entrance, taking a right on Polk, and then entering via Polk Street. It's difficult to imagine in some way if you have a line of cars that are waiting to enter, once the car gets to the entrance, it's going to probably try to enter there. It wouldn't make sense for it to move forward, go through Polk Street, come around, wait in some more lines, because the result of all this is that there's too much going on the site. So the main problem here is that there is nothing new. There's no alternative being presented in support of this adjustment. And beyond that, there's nothing that would indicate that simply using this other access, which again implicates adjustment number one in a lot of ways, would increase safety, efficiency, and decrease hazards. If anything, we're having more cars turning, taking those rights, which implicates pedestrian, bicyclists on sidewalks and so forth. So in my testimony, I also point out how this dovetails with some other issues, but I can leave that for the written record. And at the root of this adjustment number 4 is a lack of substantial evidence that demonstrates safety is being achieved, that efficiency is being achieved. And then beyond that, there's a basic inconsistency with the plain language of the code that requires some sort of alternative. They're not proposing an alternative, they're just proposing what exists already. And with that, I think these two adjustments are very problematic for the applicant, and based upon those, I think the hearings official can find that the application can be denied. Happy to take any questions.
So you're referring to your written testimony. Was that submitted this evening, or is this the written testimony from earlier?
Correct. I submitted testimony about 4 o'clock. I think I was one of the
Okay, all right. That must be the fourth one that Mr. McCarroll was referring to. So that's great, because I reviewed your testimony that you had submitted earlier, and I want to make sure that I had missed something.
Yes,
so,
this is more recent.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, the next person on behalf of the appellants.
Yeah, that's going to be Paul Conte, and just his name is not him, but that's okay.
Okay, good evening, Paul.
Good evening. You may or may not remember that I've seen you since about 13, 14 years ago.
Yes.
And
guess
what?
Just to get started, can you make sure you state your name and address for the record?
Sure. Paul Conte, 1461 West 10th Avenue, Eugene, Oregon. And we're having some technical problems here. So if it turns out that a break off, the phone number isn't working and stuff, I don't think that would be a serious prejudice. I would just ask that more importantly is that you honor the request for an additional 14 days, either by continuing the hearing or leaving the record open. I apologize that you had to read through all that back and forth, but there was a real problem here. The staff has never actually in this last little round even done what they should have done, which is let everybody know that they put the wrong TIA report in what they referred to as, quote, the record. And you may wonder why. I'll spend a little time on this because it does deal with proper procedure and prejudice. And I'm not claiming prejudice. I stay on top of this. I'm more concerned about other people. But if you look through the record, you'll see that there has been a nightmare of documents being switched and amended and changed without changing the name and no notice to people. So I've been to this rodeo a few times, and it is really critical to know that you and I and Sean and our traffic engineer are all looking at exactly the same documents. Otherwise, we really don't get to a very effective resolution. So although I was aware that the applicant had submitted additional materials, what I think is really a new application on or about December 13th, that went on for a few days. I made sure that I was provided a copy of the record, which I could then provide to the traffic engineer and attorney. And it turns out that that record that was provided and stated to be in the record was in fact not it. Now, it's not a bad mistake. I mean, anybody can make that mistake. The problem is that once I found out about it, there wasn't really a candid owning up to it, and there was no notice going out to anybody else of what had happened. So we need some time to straighten this out. Our traffic engineer only had 2 days with the right TIA report. This won't prejudice the applicant in any fashion. They have made several extensions that have gone on and on. So
Before you go on, so your traffic engineer only had 2 days before the planning director decision, or in preparation for this hearing?
in preparation for this hearing. So you listed through the exchanges that went on in the last few days between me and staff.
Correct.
And I have, by the way, because I'm that kind of person, I have all the track records of when I downloaded stuff and what was there and so forth. So and normally a week would be enough to come back to things, but effectively he had 2 days to go in, and because he couldn't count on things being the same, because they weren't, in fact. So what I'm suggesting here is that even though there might be a legal battle over whether 7 days is enough, that's all the statutes require. If we extend it for 14 days, there's not going to be an issue there. That I certainly wouldn't complain. None of our team would complain. Now I'd just like to move on, unless you have questions about that.
No, go ahead.
So you've gotten some very strong testimony that we prepared despite the impediments to it. And I'm not going to go through that in detail. What you'll find out is that despite the claims, the staff did not do a thorough review of this. And somewhat surprisingly, because this applicant has apparently a lot of resources, but they never completed the TIA. So I won't go into that. I'll just let you review that. But the one thing I want to point out here is that the TIA that's black law. You don't get waivers to that. You don't get adjustments to that. You don't provide what's required. You haven't satisfied the requirement. It's that simple. And it's not something that can be waived away. It's not something like, well, no harm, no foul. Well, does that really matter? Well, we kind of covered it here, whatever. There are absolutely, there's one place on a critical item where the applicant, Ms. Jones, the applicant's traffic engineer states, we didn't do an on-site analysis of conflicts at the intersections. So I'll leave it to you. You're gonna gotta be numb with reading the technical stuff. It's in some of our fortes, but I don't think you'll have any trouble understanding Masood Sabirian's critique of the current status of that TI, and it just simply fails. Now, I want to talk about the overall application and set a little context here. So, as you would know, I'm very, very familiar with this neighborhood, with the site. I banked at the site for a while. And there is not a problem with putting any of those by right commercial uses on that site. Not at all. And people might or might not think a gas station's the right thing to do under the climate circumstances, but that's not an issue here. As you know, it's about what the code allows. And so there's not an issue there at all. And frankly, there's not even an issue about putting two of those there. There is, in fact, an example just down the same side of 7th, which is a Shell gas station and a convenience store. And that flows all the time. That's where I get gas, and there's no problem there. And pedestrians that want to use the convenience store don't have to cross active traffic lanes and so on. But in this case, here's where the problem has arisen, which doesn't meet the code, which asks for adjustments, and which they don't qualify for adjustments other than for one single reason. We want to do what we want to do, and we can't do it and meet the code. That's the central argument for wanting those adjustments. And of course, that's not what the code allows. So first thing to understand is that none of the opposition is obstructionism. And yet there is a tremendous amount of, and it's not even that we're pushing for overly restrict things. You could have a couple of these uses on that site. The problem is that at some point, there's not enough land to be able to do so many things. What if, by the rationale of the applicant, we could put a, I was about to say CD rental place, but that doesn't matter anymore. But you could put another business on there and figure out how you kind of jury around the traffic. No, the real fundamental problem here is simply that site for any of those two uses would be appropriate. And for 3, they can't do it. And now I'm going to go a little bit into the specifics of the adjustments requested and what the problem is. So first off, they assert that physical conditions prevent them from being able to comply with putting their access 200 feet away from the midpoint of the intersection at Polk. Now, and there are plenty of accesses in existing that don't meet that, and plenty of them work okay as well. The real problem isn't being a little closer to Polk. The real problem is that adjustment that they're asking for slams their access right in front of the MX station. And that is two problems. One problem is that is going to interfere with the MX arrivals. The applicant says, well, we already got a problem there where traffic backs up at certain times. So us having to spill across out into that same travel lane that MX uses is not causing the problem. No, it is not causing the problem, and it's not meeting the criteria. The criteria says don't make it worse. It doesn't say it's okay if it's already bad. And so those cars that are backed out into that are going to add to the impediment to MX arrivals. And I'm not sure exactly where this is going to land with the law, but LTD is determined they are going to put another MX line. And I've been very involved in MX activities, and I know this right to the bone with the staff. They are going to get another MX route that either goes out Highway 99, but their preferred alternative is really to go out River Road. And in fact, I think the council may even be taking some action on that here soon. But that the staff and I went loggerheads because they wanted to run that additional route down West 11th and 13th, but we and Ted and others fought it, and they decided they would put it on as a second route on 6 and 7. Now that's a 10-minute service interval that you're going to be running for each of those lines. So you're going to have a bus trying to arrive every 5 minutes. That is a real problem. All right. Now, why did they decide to put the access there? Because in fact, there is no prohibition by the physical conditions. First off, an access can be 20 feet wide. They chose 35 feet. I'm not sure why, but in fact, the code says you really shouldn't have an access on West 7th, but under certain conditions you can have one, and you really should make it only 20 feet wide, but on certain conditions you can have it be larger or wider. But a 20-foot access is legal and adequate. Now, if you take a 20-foot access, you can start that at the western edge, 250 feet back from the intersection, and fully comply with that requirement in code. And you would do three things actually. One is you would meet the code, and for good reason, you wouldn't be jamming up against the intersection. But even more importantly is you wouldn't be jamming up the MX arrival, because cars that could be backing up would be peeling off sooner. And the physics of that are just that it's not going to have the same problem. Now, the other thing, and this is really, really important, is that would make it able to eliminate the entire safety and impediment problem of backed up traffic where there isn't enough capacity in the on-site queuing area. Because if you were back at that further distance, you would still be, of course, an access onto the property, but you would then be able to come in on a much longer queuing area. So you wouldn't need that other adjustment to have too short a queuing area. And the combination of too short a queuing area and too close to the MX intersection, that's not an additional reason to give an adjustment. Those are that makes the problem worse, and why you shouldn't give the adjustments. So to summarize on this point, and I don't want to get down too much further in the weeds, but I think this is pretty intuitive, and it's easy to see when you look at the maps or go out and walk on the site, is that all they would have to do is put a 20-foot access starting 250 feet back, leading on to a 50-foot queuing area, and there would be no impediment. Now, they would need an adjustment to the spacing requirement between that access and the access on Woke. That wouldn't be a problem. If they were proposing, I don't know about anybody else, but I know between myself and my neighbors and stuff, if they were putting that access back there where it wouldn't interfere with MX, it wouldn't put traffic backing up on the MX lane and cars, and it wouldn't be putting traffic on the sidewalk, then it'd be something worth considering. So that type of adjustment could be merited because complying with the other adjustment wouldn't enable you to do both. We agree with that. Now, here's the other piece of it that two things I want to mention, and then I'll try to kind of land this thing. First off is, well, why are they putting that? Why are they trying to get these adjustments when it's patently dangerous and inefficient? Why are they trying to put it there? The simple reason is that you can't fit that coffee shop in that corner and the 7-Eleven and an 8-pump fueling canopy and all. They can't fit it all without having a travel lane that comes down the middle and feeds off to both sides. So the only reason that they're doing that is they want to jam 3 very vehicle intensive businesses on a lot that can't accommodate them safely or efficiently. So they don't have a justification from a physical standpoint. Now, the other thing I want to mention is how one approaches, and this will be the last point I'll make. The rest of the kind of material that's in there will just speak for itself in writing, but some of this is good to point out verbally. And that is the applicant is treating the adjustment. First off, they don't qualify for what they're doing. But second off, they're treating it as if because they qualify, they think, for these adjustments, they should be treated as waivers, where they get to decide then just where they'll put that access point within that 250 feet, and just where they'll put that queuing, how short that queuing space will be, and just where they'll put it with respect to spacing with the woke access. That's not how adjustments work. In my material, I've tried to tie this to what is critical, which is the purpose of various things, the purpose of the land use code, the purpose of a TIA, and so on and so on. It's all there in the code. And I'll come back to the legal aspect as the last thing on purpose. But the point is that when an adjustment is granted, it is the city's discretion about whether to approve what is granted for that adjustment. So if the applicant qualified for these, and they don't because of the reasons I just went through, then what they would have to do is they would have to come to the city and say, yes, we need an adjustment, but here's the way to give us those adjustments to most fully implement what we're supposed to do, which is stated in both in the code and in the purposes of the code. So instead of just saying, now we can put that thing where it really causes lots of problems, they might have come back. The fact is, if they wanted to put just 2 things there and have an access off 7th, they would have had to come back and say, look, we can put this access out there where it's far enough away from the intersection MX, but we really can't get it as well far enough from woke. And we think what should happen is maybe we should be a little further from woke, maybe instead of 13 feet, or to the boundary, I'm not sure, about 20 feet to the access. Maybe we should be a little further away, like 30 feet. And if you agree with our analysis, then we'll need adjustments to both. But we're not asking you to let us stick this thing right next to the MX station. We're asking you to strike the right balance between the separation of accesses and the distance. Okay, so that's the story there. And this is not just try and think of this as not connected to the code. You'll get plenty of testimony connecting it to the code. One other thing I want to point out is an absolutely irresponsible and false statement by the applicant's attorney. And that was that the purpose serves is not an approval criteria. If you look at the criteria for the TIA, now generally that's true, although as you know, I'm sure it depends on the context whether or not it can influence how you interpret something. But that's not the case here, okay? The case here is if you look at the first element under the approval criteria for a TIA, it says you've got to fulfill the purpose that's stated in the previous section, which is the purpose of a TIA. That makes it a mandatory approval criteria. And as you probably have been through enough of these, but this is not housing. So this is not that it has to be clear and objective. This is a discretionary decision. And that statement in that first section of the approval criteria for the TIA, if you have to, not because I'm trying to force you, because you know the code, you have to treat that purpose as an element of a mandatory approval criteria, and you can't let the applicant's attorney, hornswoggle into getting away from that. So with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up. This, as you will see, all of these arguments are well founded in law. What you'll see from the applicants, and I'm sorry to say from the staffs, is lots of hand waving, lots of just conclusory statements and stuff like that. We've gone to the bones on this in terms of the code and the TIA and everything. And all we ask is just apply the rules, as Ted Koopman said. And thank you so much for letting me go on. I feel passionate about it, but I just hope we get the right decision here.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there others on the applicant team who wish to testify? Or appellant team, I'm sorry. If not, I'll turn it to public testimony.
If I may interject here.
Certainly.
I'm going to provide a few more instructions on how to we're going to go about providing the testimony, and then I did want to call attention to the fact that we did get notice that the phone lines are not working. There's a technical issue with the actual call-in option for this hearing tonight, so we can talk about that a little more during the open record period. But I just
are there individuals who are wanting to testify who are trying to call in?
It's unclear, but I would just note, if somebody told us that they're not working, and I did test them and they aren't working, so I think that it'd be good for us to discuss that.
Absolutely, yes.
Period portion. So, and so with that, I'm going to say that for those folks who are looking to provide public testimony tonight, we're going to start that process now. And so as a reminder to raise your hand, you can do so by clicking the raise hand icon in your menu if you're joining us on a phone, computer, or tablet. If you're joining us by telephone, which we had one person make it through, I'm not sure how that happened, but you can dial *9 if you want to raise your hand. The way that this is going to work is I am going to call out the person who it's their turn to provide testimony. At that time, you can turn on your microphone and your video. I will also let you know who is on deck, so the next person that's going to be up to speak. You will be brought into the meeting as a panelist, so you will notice your screen kind of blip out and in as you come into the panelist view, and that's when you'll be able to turn on your microphone. So the first person we have to provide testimony this evening is Jim New, and following that is I apologize if I miss any pronunciations, but Shekinah Horowitz. So I'm going to promote Jim to a panelist. And as a reminder, please don't turn on or unmute. Don't turn on your camera or unmute until it is your turn to provide testimony. So Jim, when you are ready, you can go ahead and provide your testimony.
Good evening, Mr. If you wish to turn on your video, you may, or you may leave it off if you want.
Thank you. My name is Jim New. I live at 3072 Webster Street, Eugene, Oregon, and I oppose this proposed project. I thank you for your opportunity, for lending me the opportunity to speak tonight. And I have a different aspect regarding opposing this project. The City of Eugene passed a Climate Action Plan 2.0 in 2019 to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and have used public funding to implement this process. The planning director approved the traffic impact analysis and adjustment review for the proposed 7-Eleven store and fuel station, coffee shop, and drive-through. The approval of a fossil fuel station does not align with the Climate Action Plan 2.0 ordinance that the City Council has adopted. It appears the planning director has violated the intent of the council and the Climate Action Plan goals. Considering public funds were used in implementing the Climate Action Plan 2.0, the planning director has misused public funds by approving a fossil fuel project. There are 6 fossil fuel dispensing stations within a quarter mile of the proposed project. The planning director should be approving electric vehicle charging stations and not facilitating internal combustion engine means of transportation. Finally, LTD took years to get the MX bus service online and operating. This, this proposed project will disrupt service at the bus stop in front of the fossil fuel station proposed site, and it is too small to handle the flow of traffic that will back up onto the 7th Street thoroughfare. Ironically, a fossil fuel station will disrupt the flow of a public transit, totally against the intent of the city's Climate Action Plan and the city's issue of wanting to promote public transit. Pedestrian right-of-ways along this strip would also be compromised. These 3 points, based on these 3 points, the Eugene Planning Director should deny this project. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Up next, we have Shekinah Horowitz. Again, I provided you the ability to unmute if you choose to provide testimony. Following Horowitz, we have George Kime. Shekinah, if you are on or available, you can go ahead when you're ready.
And again, you may turn on your video if you'd like.
Okay, I'm going to do this without video,
Okay,
and I think you can hear me now, right?
absolutely, yes.
Okay, I usually do this on a laptop, not my phone, so this is the first time doing this. Hi, my name is Shekinah Horowitz. I live at 840 Polk, less than 2 blocks from the site in question. I've lived in my home for 23 years and seen lots of change in our neighborhood. And I realize that cities get denser if we don't want endless sprawl. I'm very much in favor of the MX project, even though I know it will make things a bit busier around here. It's very much needed and overdue. However, I am very much against 3 high traffic businesses coming in just while we'll be getting the MX station for all the reasons that Paul Conte described so well. Hang on just a moment here. Okay. The assessments and ideas, his reminder to follow the rule are pure common sense, more respectful of the neighborhood and the law. And I'm going on the record as being very much in favor of everything he said. A personal note, I have asthma and arthritis, sometimes use a cane. We have young kids nearby, other alter-abled folks, with another gas station 2 blocks away, and plenty of others nearby, with so many convenience stores close by. We don't need more fumes. We don't need the congestion. We don't need the increased traffic and rubber stamp businesses when there are so many other businesses that would be very useful to a neighborhood that's underserved by things like hardware stores, since we lost the only one that we had nearby recently, or anything else that isn't a gas station or another convenience store or something that would increase traffic to the degree that it would. And I am also worried about the gas fumes, just as Baxter is finally closing after years of polluting this neighborhood and others with toxins that were completely illegal. So please consider that there are obviously many people who are not in favor of this, some who aren't even aware of this yet, who would not be happy about this going in here, who just couldn't make this meeting. Please consider that in addition to all the legalities involved. This is not a popular project in our neighborhood, and we count. Thanks. That's really all I have to contribute for now.
Thank you very much.
And we vote. Thanks.
Shekinah, I would ask that if you do want to provide your address to be added to the interested parties list and receive procedural notice regarding this, please do so now, or you can.
I'm on the email list for what's going on about this. Is that different or?
Actually, we need to have your address. So
Oh, I stated it.
Yes,
It's
yes.
840 Polk Street.
Okay, sorry.
So I'm a block and a half away from this.
I might have missed that at the beginning. I apologize.
Thank you.
Yeah, we could do better. Okay, thanks.
Mr. Kime?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I just have a few points to make. I understand that
And
we
again,
are,
before you start, can you state your name and address for the record?
yes, I'm George Kime. I live at 810 Polk Street.
Thank you.
We are here to discuss strictly the traffic impact and adjustments. And I know that I work down the street. I live down the street. I'm very close to the proposed project site. Traffic backs up on 7th to Almaden and Chambers sometimes. It's not uncommon. All of the materials that I read through, all of the applicants' materials that were submitted and on record, it does not reflect actual traffic on 7th. There's whatever traffic counts were done at inappropriate times or did not take into account the backups. Any traffic impact from this project is only going to make things worse. There's no acceptable alternative. If you've ever been on Polk Street at 7th, you know that intersection is terrible to begin with. There's not enough room for vehicles that want to turn from Polk onto 7th. There's not, it's a very difficult intersection to navigate, no matter if you're driving, walking, on a bicycle. And I haven't seen any reflection of that in any of the materials that have been submitted or put on record. Using the Polk exit from that site doesn't pose a problem if it's right turns only. Anyone leaving that site from Polk and trying to turn left and go north on Polk, that causes a major traffic issue for southbound traffic and any traffic that's turning south from 7th. It's a blind spot. There's nothing you can do about it.
Next. I didn't write it down.
And then another point I wish to make is I know there was several different versions of the application submitted. One of the emails that I sent to Mike McCarroll referenced a discrepancy that I found in the submitted materials regarding the 4-unit residential building on the south of the alley next to the site. That's not shown on any of the maps that we've seen tonight. The applicant in that packet, the applicant stated that they were no longer considering developing that parking lot into a 4-unit residential dwelling, but it still showed up on their map in the application. That concerns me. It makes me think that they're trying to take that out of their application so they can get what they want, and they'll deal with that later, which seems like a shady big business move. The back and forth and the changes make me very skeptical of what they have planned and what information they're actually forthcoming with. So I guess I just wanted on the record that I don't have a clear answer as to whether they're going to develop that or not, or how that will impact traffic on Polk or 7th. And I think that absolutely should be included in your review of what amendments they desire. Those are my 2 points. Traffic is terrible there, and not being straightforward with the residential development on the south side of that alley. And that's all I have to say.
Great. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you. So up next we have Joners. Following that, we will have Robert Elam. Joners, you can go ahead and unmute.
Good evening. Thank you. Thank you for taking public testimony about this issue in our neighborhood. My name is Joan Kleban. I live at 966 Jackson Street in Eugene, 97402. I'd like to corroborate. I was prepared to give the testimony that Jim New set before you about those many issues. Several gas stations locally, slowing down the MX that has been so many years in development. Also, it just feels like there's too much going on in the plans for that small space. But my biggest issue is about safety, about the fact that the traffic in our neighborhoods has gotten much bigger. The MX is an essential part of the corridor that's right there at the section of 7th and Polk Street. We need to be really cognizant about what's being developed, and we want to promote more pedestrian, bicycle safety, alter-abled safety, and that doesn't seem to be analogous to this particular proposal. So thank you very much for listening to all of this testimony. It's appreciated.
Thank you for your testimony.
Welcome.
Thank you. So up next we have Robert, and following that will be Dave H.
Hi, my name is Robert Elam. I live in 791 Polk, less than a block away from the proposed development site. I want to go on record to say I am opposed to the development, mirroring basically the reasons of both George Keem and others that have stated thus far. Really, the reason that I'm opposed to this is essentially the spirit of the development and the spirit of the adjustment codes precludes a developer from doing whatever they want. I would suggest that we look at the spirit of the adjustment, the reasons for adjustments to these codes, and understand why we're making the adjustments in the first place. I can say, living close to the development site, that I haven't studied this scientifically, but empirically, I can say that I know for a fact that traffic backs up on both Polk and 7th at that intersection. The idea that there's now going to be a new bus coming every 5 minutes will add to that impact and make it even more treacherous for pedestrians and anybody trying to cross that ingress at that location. On top of that, the idea of added traffic on Polk Street, which is a very family-driven area, just 1 block south of 7th, with a lot of families and pedestrians walking and crossing that street. It is just a feeder street, but this will essentially almost get it up to a thoroughfare because of the amount of traffic trying to get to this gas station / coffee shop / convenience store. For these reasons, I urge you to take a look at the adjustments, why they're being asked for, and the spirit of the adjustment code in the first place. Do they need to be made? Is there other alternatives? Can we take one of these businesses out? There are so many possibilities for a commercial development in that area for our neighborhood, and I don't see the need for 3 high volume traffic facilities like this to further congest both Polk Street and 7th Street in the intersection altogether, creating safety hazards, etc. Thank you for my time, and thank you for your time. And if you have any questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you. Up next, we have Dave H. And that is actually the last speaker who is in the queue right now. So if you haven't provided testimony and you wish to do so, you can raise your hand by, again, clicking the raise hand button, or if you're joining by phone, dialing *9. And so go ahead, Dave.
Hello, I'm David Hurst. I live at 970 Taylor Street, Eugene, Oregon, 97402. I'm about 3 blocks or so from where the development would be. I agree with what everyone's been saying so far. I'm against the development. One thing I think, and Robert started to allude to it for sure, is the traffic on Polk. I don't think has been sufficiently studied, and the impact on what the traffic will be. We've been talking a lot about 7th, but I think Polk will become a huge issue if this is approved. And also something that has been mentioned is that the city is planning on reconfiguring Polk in the next 2 years, I believe. So adding a bike lane and possibly changing the traffic flow and parking configuration. And so I would like to see that studied or included in the analysis before anything is approved at that site. And that's all I have to say.
So the city is currently proposing to reconfigure Polk?
They're supposed to be adding bike lanes and possibly changing the parking configuration within the next year or two is on their agenda.
Okay.
And also one other thing to note is that the JWN has recently requested a traffic study on Polk. And then that was one thing that was not mentioned in the application and then the city's approval for the application process. So I'd like to see those come to a conclusion before we just assume that Polk will not be affected.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
And we do have Lindsay Russell has raised her hand, so I'm gonna allow her.
Okay.
as a panelist.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Russell and I live on 1417 West Broadway Street here in the neighborhood. And I'd like to just bring a mother's point of view to this meeting in that I have young adults and children that live in my home that need a safe way to get to school and their jobs. They rely on the MX and they rely on that station at Polk. And it's imperative that it remains as safe as possible for them for transport.
Great. Thank you very much.
And I believe with that, there is nobody left in the queue at this time.
All right. Then is
I'm
there
sorry.
anyone else who has not raised their hand yet who wishes to testify?
Robert Elam has raised his hand. I don't know if he has Robert, you've already provided testimony. If you have a procedural question, you can leave your hand up, but I think. Oh, I'm sorry. This is okay. This is a different person that's providing testimony.
Oh,
from
okay.
Robert's computer. Okay. You should be able to get in shortly.
Okay. As soon as you unmute yourself, you can start.
Hi,
Yes.
can you all hear me? Thank you so much. I apologize for the confusion. My name is Suzanne Chakowski. I live at 791 Polk Street. I am Robert's wife. So I also was hoping to submit testimony, but I didn't want to cut while he had his chance. So
Absolutely.
okay. First of all, as I want to piggyback on what Robert and several of the other people have said, in that Polk is a very high traffic area. I am a driver and a cyclist in this area, and I personally have almost gotten in several accidents just pulling out of my driveway, trying to go to work, riding my bike, trying to just take a right-hand turn onto 7th. I do not see how something with this high traffic of a content will benefit the area. I do personally feel it is going to cause several safety issues. We are already in a pretty sticky situation with that at this point. In addition, as others have mentioned, we have people who have lots of children in the area, people who have disabilities that already have a difficult enough time getting around in this neighborhood. So anything that is going to go outside of this city code, which is there also as stated for a reason, will, if anything, just cause more traffic hazards and really question the safety of the people who live in the neighborhood, most of whom have been very vocal about saying that they do not want this. I have personally lived in larger cities, much like Portland, where I believe this application is from, and I have seen the hazards that it has wreaked on neighborhoods. I would really not like that to happen to mine. So thank you so much for hearing my testimony.
Thank you. Okay, is there anyone else who wishes to testify?
That was the last person in the queue. I
Okay.
did not see any more hands raised.
All right, then I will,
I'm sorry that I spoke just a moment too soon. Michael Cresco has raised their hand. Michael, I'm gonna allow you to speak.
okay, Mr.
Oh,
Cresco, if you
yes,
want.
okay. Yeah, I just wanted to I just wanted to say that I also have some concerns.
Okay, before you do it, can you please state your address and
Sure.
name for the record? Sorry to
Um,
interrupt you.
Sure. Michael Cresco, Kresko, 952 Polk Street. I also have some concerns about the high traffic volume. Being a cyclist, that is a dangerous intersection. Further, I have some concerns about just the use of the property. I think there are better uses that would benefit our neighborhood to make it more family friendly. There are several other quick marts nearby. It seems like it would be just adding to the idea of it becoming a food desert. There are grocery stores nearby, and we're very lucky to have those that provide good sources of nutrition, and just having a 7-Eleven of fast food, processed, sugared, everything else, high octane, caffeine drinks, and everything else that's probably not the best for you in a hurried, busy world. It seems like that's not something I want to promote. And I think a lot of families would benefit from there being something to support more healthier types of lifestyles. Thank you for the opportunity to present information.
Okay, and with that, I don't see any more hands.
Okay, then I will turn it over to staff for staff comments.
Yes, appreciate all the testimony from individuals tonight. I did want to provide the 4 emails that I mentioned earlier that we received between 4 and 5 p.m. 2 were from Paul Conte, 1 from Sean Malone, and 1 from Janice Gotchel.
Thank you.
And I have sent those to the hearings official,
And they are part of the record. Thank you.
part of the record, and then those will be posted on the city's website by tomorrow. So first of all, I do want to share that staff does recommend a 2-week first open record period for additional testimony to be received or provided by all parties. That's our recommendation. We did receive a fair amount of testimony, and looking at the testimony related to the approval criteria for both the traffic impact analysis and the adjustment review, folks referenced their written testimony, which staff has not had a time to review at this point. So we will be looking at that and planning to provide a written response to those arguments and allow staff to look at that in more detail. I will ask Michelle Wilcox, who is our lead public works staff for the adjustment review. We received some testimony from Sean Malone, specifically regarding adjustment number 1 and number 4. Michelle, I don't know if you had any comments. Also, Paul Conte touched on the adjustments. Like I mentioned before, we have that testimony in writing, haven't had a chance to look at it, but is there anything you would like to share at this time, or would you rather wait and staff can look at that together and provide a written response?
Yes, I'd rather wait to make sure I give a good referral. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Great. Thank you. I did want to point out Mr. Conte's testimony about the TIA approval criteria. This is one of those rare situations where the criteria themselves do incorporate the purpose statement. And so that is accurate, and staff was aware of that, and that was addressed in our decision. So just to clarify that. And there were several comments about the types of uses generating a lot of traffic. And I was wondering if Doug Singer, if he wanted to share any general information about the city's level of service standards that we have for this part of town. We recognize that as the city develops, one of the testifiers identified the policy of growing more densely without creating extra urban sprawl. And so when that happens, more uses are created, that generates more traffic. Doug, do you want to share just a little bit about the city's system called LOS, or level of service?
Yes, hello. My name is Doug Singer. I'm a registered professional engineer in the state of Oregon. I'm the city's engineering development review manager. The traffic impact analysis that was provided and the opposition's traffic engineer, have discussed different criteria. The criteria for how well streets function or how well traffic flows, there are two different ways of measuring that. The city of Eugene chooses to use what's called the level of service. Most municipalities use level of service. So there is a minimum, there's a minimum level of service for, required for our transportation system. And the traffic impact analysis, which we agree with, shows that all the streets within this study area will not be reduced to a level below the minimum required level of service. So, there's no criteria for, is this development going to add more traffic, or is this criteria not going to add more traffic? Is it going to make more congestion? The criteria is, will the transportation system still meet the minimum required level of service? And the traffic impact analysis shows that the transportation facilities will still meet the minimum required level of service. There's also a criteria for traffic safety, and crash data from this area is collected, and that traffic data was analyzed, and this area still meets the traffic safety requirements for the area. All that information is in the TIA, and all that information is in the information that I've provided.
Thanks, Doug. Another comment George Keim mentioned in his testimony was the original application did include a parking lot south of the alley that was proposed for residential development. Later applications, that potential project was removed from the applications, and the applicant stated that at this time they're not planning to do anything there. It was extra parking associated with the bank, and is still owned by the owner of the subject property, but there are no plans at this time to develop that. So just wanted to clarify that.
Is it still showing on the most recent site plan, which is what I understood him say?
It is not.
Okay.
Right. I do want to leave time for the applicant's response to testimony. And
Yes.
so as a staff team, we will be reviewing all the testimony provided this evening and responding in writing and providing that within the next open record period.
Thank you. Okay, I will turn over to applicant rebuttal, and is Janet Jones, are you presenting the rebuttal?
Hi there. Again, I am Janet Jones. Address is 1515 Southeast Water Avenue, Portland, Oregon, 97214. I wanted to specifically address some of the issues that were raised in the meeting tonight. First off, talked about regulations that were ignored, just as Mike McCarroll and Doug Singer replied. There was mitigation that was proposed to minimize conflicts at the proposed site driveway. And this was mitigation that was required as part of the condition of approval. We also reviewed safety. Crash data was collected and reviewed between 2015 and 2019, which is the standard in the industry, reviewing the latest 5 years of the complete crash data as provided by ODOT. Specifically noting at the proposed driveway location, which is fairly close, if not the exact location of the former Wells Fargo Bank location, there were no instances of crashes with either other vehicles, or pedestrians. So to expect some sort of crash pattern to develop with a use that actually generates fewer trips during the PM peak hour, we would not expect that. To reply to Sean Malone's testimony regarding that an adjustment be necessary for West 7th Avenue because there's already an access on Polk Street. I will add that the accessing only the Polk Street driveway further impacts Polk Street, which is a lower classification roadway. So we would not want to add more traffic to a roadway that's lower classification and has adjacent residential uses. He also talked about the alternative traffic study. The city has an alternative traffic study form, which we did fill out with all the required information. So that was included as part of the application. And in addition, we did cover alternative access review. So on page 22 of the TIA, there's actually a section that reviews alternatives to access points, alternatives to what we actually proposed. So we did consider different alternatives, and we did note why alternative locations would not work or would not be as safe. Again, the crash data, we reviewed the crash data. So there was a thorough evaluation of safety done there. In response to Paul Conte, he said that we never completed the TIA and its full requirements. We did provide a letter that summarizes every single requirement as specified in the city's code. And we showed where in the TIA each requirement was met. He also stated that there was no on-site circulation and queuing analysis. Well, in fact, on page 20 of the TIA, we did include an analysis of internal circulation and queuing. And we even provided an internal circulation and queuing diagram, which I believe was part of the appendix I of the report. He also said that the proposal doesn't even meet the code, and that it further degrades traffic. Well, it's important to note and take into consideration the context of this area. Like others have noted, West 7th Avenue is congested, and this is a developed urban area. And it's not unusual to request adjustments to standards given those existing conditions. And for this particular proposal, the existing conditions preclude the standards for access spacing, such as meeting the 2-foot spacing from the adjacent driveway. He noted, why can't the access be 20 feet wide? Why is it 35 feet wide? Well, the 35-foot driveway is needed to accommodate fuel truck turns. This is shown in Appendix I of the TIA. The larger trucks are shown to swing wide toward the west in order to exit the site as they complete a right turn toward West 7th Avenue. In order to minimize that impact onto the sidewalk and avoid the truck turn from crossing too many lanes of traffic, the driveway width is necessary for the trucks to complete their right turn. That width is 35 feet. Ultimately, the narrower the driveway, the greater the impact to West 7th Avenue. So providing a narrower driveway actually increases the potential for these trucks to cross more lanes of traffic on West 7th Avenue. Additionally, providing a driveway, as he suggested, that's directly adjacent to the Stay Woke driveway, presents more conflicts for vehicles, not only vehicles, but pedestrian. A lot of people have already noted that with the MX station nearby, there's a lot of pedestrians. Well, what happens when you put two driveways directly adjacent to each other, there's a reduced buffer or reduced pedestrian refuge on the sidewalk. And so now you're concentrating a lot of vehicle turning points into a wider area with no refuge for pedestrians. And that presents a safety issue, which we wanted to avoid. Let's see. Again, I wanted to reiterate that we proposed mitigation to intend to minimize driveway blocking. There was some discussion about transit and issues with the driveway location in MX project. I wanted to point out that the River Road corridor and the Highway 99 corridor routes could add additional MX service at this location, but at this point, there is no definitive number. And as reported in our TIA, we used the latest information at the time about the number and the frequency of stops at this location. In response to George Keim, he talked about inappropriate times of traffic counts. I will point out that yes, under COVID conditions, traffic is irregular and atypical. And for that reason, we scoped with city staff to determine the appropriate adjustments for 2018 traffic counts, which were historical pre-COVID conditions. We growth adjusted those to existing conditions, and they're likely more conservative. We also collected 2021 traffic counts to confirm, in fact, using 2021 traffic counts would not be appropriate.
They would not be appropriate because they are less, because of COVID conditions?
Correct. So if we just went out and took 2021 counts, we'd be underestimating traffic.
Okay.
David Hurst talked about traffic on Polk has not sufficiently been studied. And he also mentioned that the city has plans to add a bike lane. So the first thing I want to point out that is in our TIA report is that the bike lanes are listed in the city's TSP, which is the Transportation System Plan. These plans are not funded improvements, but rather projects that are planned. So when they're not funded, they are not necessarily going to be constructed anytime soon. I also wanted to point out that in our TIA, in our adjustment application, we noted that adding additional traffic to Polk, I think I already covered this, but adding additional traffic to Polk Street is not ideal because it's a lower classification roadway and there's residential uses nearby. So if we eliminated that access on West 7th Avenue, we'd actually see a greater impact on Polk, which is not ideal because again, lower classification, lots of homes nearby. Lindsay Russell talked about the MX route. Again, the proposed access location on West 7th Avenue provides a safe buffer between the access to the west, the Stay Woke access. And by providing that safe buffer, pedestrians have a nice refuge area where they can wait for any traffic to pass rather than putting two driveways side by side, which would eliminate that pedestrian buffer in that refuge area. Suzanne Shirkowski talked about close calls with crashes on West 7th Avenue. Again, we've reviewed crash history. There were no instances of crashes at the former bank use driveway and with a lower generating site during the PM peak hour. There's no reason to believe that there would be crashes. And that concludes my testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Marsh, did you want to provide rebuttal on behalf of the applicant?
Yes, just very briefly, because I think Ms. Jones covered everything quite well. So I'm not gonna get into any great detail. But for the record, my name is Steve Marash. I'm an attorney with the Lander Home law firm, which is located in Vancouver, Washington, 805 Broadway, Suite 1000, on behalf of the applicant. I just wanted to briefly respond to some of the legal issues that were raised on adjustment 1. There was an argument, it sounded like there was an argument that in order to qualify for adjustment 1, the applicant has to prove that there's no other access to the property besides the one that we're addressing here on 7th Avenue. And I didn't see that as a criteria anywhere in the adjustment criteria. The adjustment criteria is just that physical conditions preclude compliance with the standard. And we believe we've met that here, and we're not required to prove that there's no other access to the property. In addition, as Ms. Jones just testified, closing 7th would cause more impacts on Polk Avenue, or excuse me, on the Polk access. And so even if it were a requirement, we don't think that would be sufficient to deny the adjustment. But again, to add that type of requirement would basically insert words into the code that aren't there, which is something that we don't do. I also wanted to briefly address the issue of the access width. I think Ms. Jones gave good testimony that it needs to be 35 feet in order to have an adequate turning radius for trucks. And so it would preclude compliance with the standard, since there's not enough room on that frontage for a 35-foot wide access and to meet the 250-foot spacing standard from the influence area. But in addition to that, the code defines physical conditions to include development on adjacent property. So the existing Stay Woke access at its current location is a physical condition. And that also precludes meeting the standard, even if we could narrow up the access, to something below 35 feet that would fit within the 250-foot influence area of the street to the east, and put the access all the way up against the Stay Woke. That would create a safety issue, having those two accesses right next to each other. And so that's a physical condition because the existing location of the Stay Woke access way is a physical condition under the language of the code. And so even if we were able to narrow the access, which we're not because of the truck movement, it would still be a physical condition that would preclude compliance. It would also require an adjustment to the influence area of the intersection to the west, because that intersection is partially controlled and has a 150-foot influence area. So putting the access right next to Stay Woke would be in that influence area, would require adjustment to that section. So we'd be back to the same criteria and no way to meet it. I think all the other issues, legal issues, were addressed. This is all traffic. So I think our engineer has done an excellent job at addressing it. I'm sure either she or I would be available to answer any questions that the official may have. And there was one issue raised about residential use, and sort of the implication was the applicant was up to no good because they decided that they're not going to pursue development on the property to the south at this time. And, in fact, nothing, could be further from the truth. The applicant is not interested in pursuing that development at this time. And if at some future date, some development is proposed on that property, it will have to go through the same public process that any development would have to go through. But beyond that, I mean, if we still had the apartments in the project, that would be needed housing. And so then the development would be subject to all the protections for a needed housing application, and clear and objective standards would apply. So the applicant isn't gaining anything by pulling the residential out of this application and just moving forward with the commercial. So I just wanted to be clear on that point. And then finally, we agree with the request for a 14-day open record. And we would add that because a lot of new information came in on the day of the hearing, that we believe it would be good to have an initial 14-day open record. And then we would also request an additional 7 days after that for all parties to submit factual rebuttal to whatever comes in during the initial open record period. And then finally, we'd like the applicant 7 days that the applicant is entitled to by statute for final legal argument. And unless there's any questions, that's all that we have at this time.
Thank you very much. Okay, so at this point, I don't have any further questions of any of the parties. I'd like to look at the calendar to figure out the open record periods. We have clear dates. Okay, so thank you, Jeff. So with requested 14 days, and I definitely am going to grant the 14 days. I am a little concerned if people have been precluded from being able to provide testimony and oral testimony that could not equally provide written testimony by phone. But unless, if there is someone who was precluded from providing oral testimony that cannot equally provide that testimony in writing, I'd like to know that within the next 24 hours to make sure that everyone has that opportunity. However, I do think that in all likelihood, written testimony will be effective and ensure that everyone has an opportunity to make their voice heard, which is what essentially we're wanting to do. So unless there is someone who was needing to provide oral testimony that cannot equally provide their testimony in writing, we will assume that the first record period will close on March 16th, no additional oral testimony, but written testimony from any party on any issue by March 16th at 5 p.m. And when I say 5 p.m., it is 5 p.m. It's not 5:01, it is 5 p.m. So if you have written testimony to submit, please submit it to the city and they will forward it to me. And it must be before March 16th at 5 p.m. And then 1 week later, the response period is testimony that is responding to testimony that was submitted during the first open record period. This is not an opportunity to add new issues. The new issues can be raised in the first record period. The second is responding to testimony that was provided during the first record period. That record period will close at 5 p.m. on March 23rd. And then finally, because the applicant has the burden of proof, the applicant will be given the opportunity for written rebuttal, and that record period closes on March 30th at 5 p.m. And again, the applicant is restricted to rebuttal testimony, not new issues. And if there are questions about the open record period, please raise your hand now. Okay, if not, I will close this evening's hearing. The record will stay open. Oh, Jeff, did you have raise your hand?
I just wanted to note for everybody attending today that we'll also post a link to this recording. It should be available tomorrow within the site's application materials to ensure that people have access to watch this and then provide comment.
Thank you very much.
To do that. So we'll make sure that that's available.
Okay. So with that, I will close this evening's hearing. The record will remain open. And as I said, just follow the open record periods. Make sure you get your testimony, written testimony to the city by the stated deadlines, and they will forward it to me. And thank you all very much for taking the time to participate this evening. And I look forward to receiving your final written testimony. Thank you very much.
I will note that right as you were closing out there, here's official, we did have Lydia Bishop raise her hand. I want to allow her to speak and ask a question if she has a clarifying question around the open record period.
Is this a?
I'm sorry, I did not mean to raise my hand, Jeff. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good night. Sorry for that error.
No worries. Thanks, Lydia.
Okay, with that, have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone.